Be seated. This date marks the traditional occasion on which each year we pause to remember and to be thankful for the founders of this university. Not just those founders whose names the school bears, but that vast host of persons, some with us today, whose careers and generosity and service and loyalty have made this school what it is, and who have provided it with its aspirations and ideals for the future. Of course, especially, we pause to remember that founder whose birthday this is, Robert E. Lee. For it is to Lee that this school owes not only its survival in those difficult and dismal days more than 100 years ago, but also it is to him to whom it owes much of the idealism, educational and personal, which has motivated the lives of all of us who have worked here in the intervening century. In this day of massive image-making publicity and overblown hyperbole, it is strangely difficult to find telling words to describe the truly superlative. Sadder still, perhaps, it is sometimes more difficult than it should be even to recognize the superlative achievement and the superlative person, even on those few occasions when we have a chance to meet it. Today's speaker is such a person. Appropriately, he is also a part of that small but crucial procession of persons who in the truest sense may properly be thought of as founders of this university. When Dr. Leyburn came here in 1947 as dean of the university, he already had achieved distinction and acclaim as a scholar and teacher during his 20 years as professor of sociology at Yale. His book on the Haitian people had won the Anisfeld Wolf Award as the best book of its day in the field of race relations. And that book, republished by Yale in 1966, remains the classic in its field. Subsequent publications, such as his Social History of the Scotch-Irish, have achieved and deserved similar acclaim and distinction. Dr. Leyburn's first college degrees, a bachelor's and master's degree at Duke in economics. Thereafter, he earned a second master's in economics at Princeton and his PhD degree in sociology at Yale. He was awarded honorary degrees at Duke University and in 1974 at Washington and Lee. Washington Lee's award of an honorary degree was its effort to pay its highest public accolade to signify our esteem and affection and gratitude to Dr. Leyburn. And I would add, as most of you know, it is quite extraordinary, nearly unique, for this university to award an honorary degree to one of its own faculty. In 1947, I was a sophomore student at Washington and Lee, and not a very good one. But I have no trouble at all remembering the excitement that pervaded this campus during those first years when Dr. Leyburn came here as dean of the university. I mean intellectual excitement. Excitement about the quest for individual and institutional excellence with which he challenged all of us. Even generally indifferent students, like me, felt a charge in the intellectual atmosphere and tried as best we could to respond to the challenge. Those of us who had him as a teacher can tell you that it was more than a special treat. It was a mind-sharpening experience of the highest order. And again, I emphasize, this was true even for those of us who had no particular bent in the direction of intellectual hard work. The Leyburn plan for Washington and Lee was a plan for excellence. As I noted at the time of his retirement in 1972, the subsequent history of Washington and Lee has been in large measure the history of our efforts to implement the Leyburn plan. In 1955, he resigned as dean to devote his full attention to his first love of teaching and scholarship. He served as head of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology until 1967 and continued to teach until his retirement at the age of 70 in 1972. If there is such a thing as the Renaissance man, that oft referred to person whom most of us never meet, then Dr. Leyburn is that person. Aside from the fields of sociology and anthropology, where his principal endeavor lay, He taught with utter mastery in the fields of ancient history, the classics in translation, music, and political science. He is an accomplished musician and pianist of concert quality. It is said that when he moved his home from Lexington after retirement, his personal library weighed 4 tons. As a further indication of the quality of the life of this man, it is worth noting that he is and always has been an active and energetic participant in the life of his church. He taught locally in the Sunday school here at the Presbyterian Church for many years and was a leading elder of that church, and has brought his talent and time to tasks of the presbytery regionally and nationally. In spite of all these and many other attributes and achievements, it may be that to those of us who have known him for years, his most memorable characteristic is far more personal and equally as distinctive. He is for us the personification of the gentleman in temperament, in manner, and in attitude of unselfish service and concern for others. Many generations of students were blessed by hearing Dr. Leyburn speak to them as incoming freshmen on the aspirations of excellence. There are many here who never had that opportunity. I'm glad that you and I can hear from Dr. Leyburn on this Founders Day. His topic is the Washington and Lee ideal. It's my honor to introduce to you Dr. James G. Leyburn. Dr. Leyburn.
Thank you, President Huntley. It always delights me to return to Washington and Lee, and I'm especially happy to be allowed a part in this Founders Day Assembly and the ODK Assembly. Washington and Lee has absorbed a good part of my life and thoughts and affection. And as you will see from my remarks, ODK expresses many of the ideals I have long cherished for this university. My acquaintance with Washington and Lee goes back to my childhood, with my father's stories about his undergraduate days here, and with visits to Lexington, which had long been the home of the family. I was struck, even in those childhood days, by what seemed to be an intangible quality that pervaded the campus, as if some indefinable spirit hovered about the place and the people who passed through its halls. I hasten to remark that I am by no means a mystic. Who ever heard of a mystical streak in a blue-stocking Presbyterian? But I am not alone in sensing this indefinable quality of which I speak. In classical antiquity, that most practical and hard-headed of people, the Romans, held the idea that at birth an individual acquired a kind of attendant spirit. They called it a genius, which protected him through life and which gave him the unique qualities of body and mind which he possessed. By extension, they conceived that each of their important institutions and localities, the Senate, for example, had its genius loci. This genius of the place was compounded of its physical appearance, the distinctive impression it made upon visitors to it, but more importantly, its way of inspiring affection and loyalty, its curious quality of demanding that one work to make it uniquely great. To me, Washington and Lee has such a genius loci that gives it a quality which distinguishes it from every other university. No one could, after 5 minutes on this campus and an observation of its students, mistake Washington and Lee for a state university or for Notre Dame or for Georgia Tech. It is not merely that our campus is different from theirs, that we have our special traditions, that our curriculum is our own, that our athletic program is not the same. Who can say what has gone into the creation of the genius of this place that makes us love it and recognize its uniqueness? Our genius loci is compounded of the beauty of the colonnade under snow on a moonlit night, of sunset behind House Mountain, of the honor system, of great teachers and their courses, of long hours in the library boning up for tests and exams, of fancy dress, of victories and defeats on Wilson Field and in the gym, of going down the road, of pride in Washington and Lee's academic standards, indeed of 230 years of accumulated tradition built up by men whose names most of us would no longer recognize. What has always interested me about the Roman idea of genius, especially as applied to Roman citizenship, is the demands it made upon a person and the almost amazing acceptance by Romans of their obligations. In a moving passage in the Aeneid, the ideal is held up of Roman rule, of justice and peace and discipline. And it was this kind of practical idealism that, to my mind, explains the major part of the grandeur that was Rome. On the day in which ODK honors those who have made a distinctive contribution to this university, I suggest that Washington and Lee's genius loci, like the god Janus, looks in two directions, backward to our great heritage and forward to our expectations for the future. It is to the future that our motto points, known in Cautus Futuri. If we are truly to be not unmindful of the future, it might be well to clarify our hopes for the university. With diffidence, I suggest two ideals I have long cherished for Washington and Lee. And since I have spoken of these before on this campus, I ask the indulgence of the older members of the community if my next remarks seem for them a twice-told tale. The first of these ideals is the one which President Huntley has just mentioned, that of excellence. And I'm sure that all of us would acknowledge the validity of such an ideal for a first-rate university like ours. But the excellence I have in mind is of a different quality from that ordinarily implied by the word. I resort again to classical antiquity. By common consent, the Athenians of the 5th century BC reached a pinnacle of achievement. Within a few decades, actually only about 2 generations, the small city of Athens, not as large as Richmond, produced such men as Themistocles and Pericles, Socrates and Plato, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, Phidias, Aristophanes, and dozens of others whose names ring down the centuries. How could all of this happen? Not, I think, because of some sudden miraculous combination of genes in its citizens, but chiefly because the Athenians had a clear ideal to strive for, one inculcated into every youth from the moment he started to school. The Greek word for this ideal was arete, A-R-E-T-E, arete. And the dictionary blandly defines this simply as excellence. For the Athenians, however, the word and the ideal had overtones and undertones far richer than the ordinary meaning. From the outset, a schoolboy in Athens was made to realize that it was never enough to be pretty good. He must strive to excel, and in every part of the curriculum. We certainly share with the Athenians their stress on excelling in sports and games. Like us, Greek youths trained their bodies. They exercised daily and strenuously. They invented the gymnasium in which they trained both body and mind. They played constantly, and once again, it was the Greeks who started the Olympic Games, and they were the first people in the world to have competitive sports. But now consider how the ideal of excellence ramified and how far it went beyond excellence of body. One could never be considered up to the ideal unless he was versatile. Arete really meant excellence in all that is admirable. Every boy was expected to be thoroughly at home with literature, and many Athenian youths could quote from memory long passages from Homer and the other poets. During this great age, Athenians built the Parthenon, and its architects and sculptors knew that their work would be appreciated by true connoisseurs, that is, by men schooled to cultivate the arts. One of the best examples of arete in Athens was Sophocles, the great tragic playwright. He was reputed to be one of the most skilled flutists and dancers in Athens. He was an industrialist and a successful one. He was elected treasurer of the empire, was a priest in a local temple, and was twice chosen as general in the army, in addition to being the author of 121 tragedies. It was assumed that the purpose of education was to make every youth in Athens a good citizen, willing to devote endless time in service to the city, listening almost daily to political debate in the agora, voting on domestic and foreign policy, holding public office, serving in the army or navy. What to me makes these Athenians most memorable and admirable is the way they use their minds. They seem to have infinite curiosity, and they discovered that intellectual exercise was by all odds the most stimulating and rewarding part of life. They were always eager to learn something new. When Herodotus came back from his visits to Egypt or Persia, the Athenians gathered daily in the agora to ask him about how other people lived and thought. When Socrates showed up, youths left their exercises and games to query that wise man. What really is truth, Socrates? What is beauty? How can we know what is worth living for? Their curiosity and imagination made them the first natural scientists the world had known. They had tremendous courage of mind. They dared to be skeptical and questioning, no matter how disturbing this might be to their peace of mind. They went constantly to witness the great tragedies that challenged what had always been regarded as eternal verities. I could go on and on about these great Athenians, But you can see why Edgar Allan Poe spoke of the glory that was Greece. It was glory, because these Athenians lived in a perfect ferment of the mind and found it exhilarating and rewarding. Now for my point. How could all this glory come to pass within a few decades? Not by some transcendent miracle, nor do I believe for a moment that these Athenians had any better minds than ours. I am certain that Washington and Lee men are quite as intelligent as Athenians of the 5th century, quite as quick and capable. They made an imperishable name for themselves and for their little city because they exercised their minds and creative imaginations to the fullest, not content to be merely good in a single field. Why should this Washington and Lee community not become the Athens of America? Can we truthfully say that our Washington and Lee ideal of excellence has so touched our minds and hearts that every man here feels the compulsion to excel in many areas, to open his mind to new ideas and seek out knowledge about what is unfamiliar to him? I have always felt disappointed that many of our Washington and Lee students so soon begin to specialize that they miss the riches of this university's superb curriculum, and that other students seem so intent on grades that they refuse the challenge of difficult courses. I believe I should say that the besetting sin of Washington and Lee students is their conventionality of mind, their willingness to follow accustomed paths instead of launching out into the unknown. I'm struck by a curious phenomenon that there always seem, at least to me, to be many more distinctive individuals and eccentrics on the faculty and staff here at Washington and Lee than there are among the students half their age. Why should this be? We certainly encourage incipient scholars and financiers and businessmen, but I think the university would be healthier if more students left the beaten tracks. Oddballs are not comfortable for administrators and teachers. Nevertheless, I wish students on the campus more frequently caused some fluttering in the dovecotes of the sedate. Or again, I know how many honors theses are produced, and that is fine. But why does the university not seem to stimulate other and less conventional forms of originality and creativity? Where are the Washington and Lee poets and novelists and composers and painters and sculptors in this country, for example? Have we narrowed down the ideal of arete to make it conform to the values of a job-getting career? The second ideal I cherish for Washington and Lee, and here I draw upon the French language of chivalry and idealism, is that of noblesse oblige. It was a recognized part of the code of a nobleman that he must undertake obligations for those weaker and less privileged than himself. Noblesse oblige. Nobility obligates. No law required this duty. It was simply understood that in the very nature of things, those who have power must protect those who are weak. Those who have means must care for the needy. Those who rule must concern themselves with the welfare of those who are ruled. Because one was well born, one naturally assumed full responsibility for the community. All privilege obligates. Needless to say, power was often abused, but the nobleman, indeed the gentleman, up through the 18th century, would never deny the obligation of the privileged position which he occupied. There were many rewards, even for those who concerned themselves with the lowly. The chief of these was perhaps a sense of holding together a community, of knowing that one was needed, of finding inner satisfaction in duty done and in kindnesses beyond the call of duty. No men in modern America are more privileged than the students of Washington and Lee. Economic background, education, health, range of acquaintance, knowledge of the world, personal gifts, awareness of moral imperatives, all these advantages and more put Washington and Lee men in a position similar to that of the aristocrats who lived by the code of noblesse oblige. Can we then say that it is characteristic of this university's graduates and students that they automatically, and without having to reflect on the expenditure of time and energy and imagination, exert themselves for the benefit of their communities? To return for a moment to the great Greeks, let's ask why Athenian youths were so eager to live up to the ideals of arete. What did they gain? At most, in a material way, only the crown of a simple laurel wreath. Much more important was the awareness that one's abilities might bring glory to his polis, his dear city, that would make it shine more brilliantly than ever. Here was something bigger than self to live for. And the more honor one achieved personally, the more significant his contributions might be to the community. Perhaps because of this self-centered world of our childhood, we find it easy to think only of ourselves. We want to win honors for the acclaim they bring. But the applause turns to ashes if one's achievements remain simply personal. The true satisfaction of a triumph is the opportunity it gives to be useful to others. Once again, it is the temptation at college to try to win acceptance by doing what the crowd does, even when it is brainless and destructive, or to live passively without making any extra effort. But even to mention these ways of life makes us realize that they are not satisfactory. They produce no arete. I suggest that the ultimate wisdom of the Athenians in their dedication to the ideal of arete was the insight that achieving excellence could benefit other people, their polis, their community. That was the real reward of all their striving. Parenthetically, the Greek word idiotes, which we translate into English as idiot, means literally living a private life, concentrating only on what benefits oneself. How truly idiotic. Once again, as in the ideal of excellence, we might learn from our attitude towards sports. Any member of a team knows what it means to work for the success of the team, not concentrating on becoming a star for his own glory. Does that wisdom extend beyond the playing fields and the gymnasium? What have you done to make Washington and Lee a more admirable university? The first bylaw of this institution declares that we are not a denominational university. But then the bylaw continues, the obligation to inculcate the Christian ideal is hereby affirmed. I think I should name as our greatest shortcoming our failure to take that obligation seriously. Whatever else the Christian ideal comprehends, it surely includes compassion, kindness to others, service, loving one's neighbor as oneself. Not many students seem truly aware of the conditions of life beyond the campus, of the poverty and distress and injustices that exist within a mile of this building and in Rockbridge County. And I fear that only a few of our 1,400 students are doing anything positive to alleviate these conditions and this suffering. There is a splendidly sonorous word, beloved of Milton and Bacon, that sums up the ideal of arete and of noblesse oblige. That word is magnanimity. The great Oxford Dictionary is rich in its comment on this word. It means great-souled, greatness of mind and heart, the habit of feeling and acting worthily under all circumstances, high-mindedness, intrinsic nobility, and note here the implication of noblesse oblige. The Oxford continues, in its earlier use, the word implies especially high courage and noble steadfastness of purpose. In its later use, high-minded generosity. This was what Newman had in mind when he named the essentials a university should instill in its students and put magnanimity among them. My hope and dream for Washington and Lee is that from this tap day forward, from this day when we honor those adjudged excellent among us, that your generation of Washington and Lee men will dedicate themselves to magnanimity, to cultivating the ideals of arete and noblesse oblige. You could, from this day forward, transform the university. Then in future years, we might all look back on this day and say with Henry V to his men just before Agincourt, we few, we happy few, we band of brothers will stand a tiptoe when this day is named.